Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Jonah Fontenot. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, Beyond Now, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I will say, Jonah was brought to People of Distinction today by some of the best movers in the business, author Reputation Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, move it through ARP. You can find them at authorreputationpress.com. And guys, listen, it is an absolute honor and such a pleasure to have Jonah here on the line because his book we're discussing today, Beyond Now, is a collection of poems that Jonah has written. But what's so incredible about it, and really what's so important, is, we were discussing on the pre-screening call, and Jonah is talking to me about really how he started and how, what he was thinking when he was writing this book, and one of the underlying messages, and really where the audience itself that he wanted to connect to is people that, can be around a group of other individuals, but still feel like they're alone, right? Still feel like they're by themselves. And I don't know about you guys, but I can relate, right? I've been in so many circumstances in my life where I had just that, right? I'm surrounded by people, and yet I don't really know how to connect to any of them, right? I can speak, and yeah, my words are coming out of my mouth, but at the end of the day, I don't really know how to articulate some of the things that I'm feeling, right? And I absolutely loved when Jonah said that because, again, it was something that, for me, was so relatable. And he's written this book with the specific emphasis on, A, the understanding that he's been in that position and he knows what it feels like, but also as a way to bridge the gap. Right, because if there's one thing that we know and there's one thing that we love to discuss here at People of Distinction is how our human family needs to come together, right? Or how our human family should be coming together, because when we come together, that's when we grow, that's when we develop, that's when we overcome the obstacles and the adversity that we experience in our lives. And I absolutely love the fact that we have Jonah here on the line because, listen, he's going to be talking from his perspective. And he's going to be reading some of his poetry, but always keep in mind, how do you relate to this? How can you take this and implement it into your own life? And that is really where the treasure lies. So without further ado, we have Jonah here on the line. Jonah, first and foremost, man, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
I am well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, we're very much looking forward to this. Jonah, before we jump into the book itself, let's hold off slightly. Tell our listening audience a little bit more about your background.
Well, I was born in a suburb of Los Angeles and raised in and around the Los Angeles area in Southern California. Mm-hmm. My upbringing was rather oppressive. And abnormally violent. Now, when you're raised in an environment, any environment, whatever you're in, it seems normal to you.
Absolutely. So
you don't necessarily, as a child, you don't realize that the circumstances are abnormal or even extreme. Maybe happy versus unhappy, but nothing seems abnormal. Nothing seems extreme. So I did not know that the way I was raised was oppressive, just as people in North Korea don't know that they are oppressed. Mm-hmm. And anything that went wrong for which I was blamed, I thought it really was my fault. And as I grew older and I struggled to connect with other people and I struggled to communicate, I looked for ways to identify with my environment. And as I did that, I realized more and more that this is not normal. This is not right. I I see other people doing this, and I hear other people talking about this and that, and I'm like, is that what I'm supposed to be doing here? Is that what I'm supposed to be able to talk about? Am I supposed to be able to say, I can't wait to see my mom again? Or I better hurry back because my parents are going to worry about me? Or, I always have my family. They're always there for me. Am I supposed to be able to say these things? Is this supposed to be true? Or is this just something that you see on TV? And nobody's life is really like that. So I come from a very fire and ice environment, and everything was either black or white, mostly black. And I learned to overcome and to break through, to burrow under, or to find a way around the obstacles that were presented before me. And then later in life, as I finally was able to get into school, I was able to figure out why those obstacles were placed in front of me to begin with. And so I was raised without an education. I had no kindergarten. I had no grade school. I had no tutors. I had no homeschool. I was completely, totally uneducated. I learned how to read and to write a little bit. When I was 18 and I left home, I could barely write my own name. Over the years, I improved my penmanship and I developed other academic skills, but the only thing I knew how to read, the only academic skill I had when I was 18 and I left my parents' house was how to read. I couldn't add 2 and 2. I didn't know how to drive. I actually was not allowed to learn how to drive. So everything was a challenge. Now, when you're standing in a room of people who are half your age, and all of them have been educated up to that age, all of them have learned about science and reading, and they've learned about poetry, they've learned about history, they've learned about Christopher Columbus, and they've learned about all these different academic subjects that are taught in school. You kind of feel like you're this really old idiot. And I had to fix that. I had to somehow get an education, but I had never sat in a classroom, and I had never been assigned homework. I had never written a paper. I'd never performed a math equation. I'd never solved a math problem. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that I had to do it. One way or another, I had to figure this out.
Right.
My siblings and I, we were all raised that way, and we were all severely mistreated. Physically, I got it worse than anyone else. My brother endured something that I would not want for anybody, ever. He was never physically beaten. He was mistreated in another way. And looking back, I'm glad I was treated the way I was, not the way he was. But I learned how to work. I worked full-time, starting when I was about 12, a little bit before that. And I was busy 40-plus hours a week. It's not like I was in school or anything. So Gloria, my mother, would order firewood in large logs. It was cheaper that way. And she would order, 6, 8, or 10 cords every winter of these large stumps. And then it was my job to split them and stack them and bring them into the house when the fireplace was empty. I did all the yard work. I did all the errands, and I was always cleaning. I was always cooking. She never, ever cooked. She never cleaned anything, and she was always so high, you never really could have a conversation with her. So I was kind of isolated. Even if I was around other people, I wasn't considered part of them. Mm-hmm. My siblings were treated very sweetly. My brother, I think, a little too sweetly. But they got everything they ever wanted. If they walked into a shopping mall with Gloria, my mother, or my grandmother, when they walked out, they had this pile of things in the shopping cart that they got. I usually didn't get anything. In fact, I usually wasn't even invited. So, yeah, it was almost like there were two different households. Me, I was the only member of my household, and I had to live among these others. So, if they had a problem, they could talk to their mom about it. And whenever there was any trouble or problems, she was there for them. And they got lots and lots of hugs and lots of kisses. And I did not. And I learned later why that was. And I didn't learn that until in my 30s when I started studying psychology. So I started with zero education. Like I said, nothing. And then I earned an AA in 2014, and I earned a BS a few years after that. In 2018, I got my BS in psychology. And then I was in a master's program studying global security and intelligence, and homeland security. But I ran out of money for tuition, so I had to stop. But I had a B average in the master's program, and if I listen very carefully, I can hear my mother turning over in her grave because I'm getting an education, and she did not like that. She always cursed education. I later made connections that I did not make as a child. One was she was always fascinated with the cruelest dictators. Ivan the Terrible, Saddam Hussein, Kim Jong-il, now Kim Jong-un, even Adolf Hitler. And looking back, she never actually had anything negative to say about them. She defined them as authoritative and effective and powerful. It's almost like she wanted to be like them. So I think she read their biographies, and she had biographies on all of them. I think she read their biographies almost like a textbook. She wanted to emulate, and she was very much consumed by her own hunger for power and control of others. So I think she could identify with communist dictators and totalitarian authorities. She could see herself as that, and she tried to create her own little kingdom in which she could snap her fingers and make someone laugh, snap her fingers twice and make them angry, snap her fingers 3 times and make them cry, with that much control. And I'm not making that up. One time she actually, she was high on something, and there was a visitor. She had some, I don't know who her friend was, but her friend was there, and she was kind of bragging to her friend about how much control she had over my brother. And she called my brother over to her, and she said, "You're happy, start laughing." And he started laughing, and he got weak in the knees, and he was laughing. And then she said, "Stop, now you're sad, start crying." And he started crying. She had that much control of him.
Wow.
And I learned, I learned later why she hated me my whole life. And that was because if nothing made me laugh, I would laugh. And if something made me angry, I was angry about that. I wasn't interested in whatever she wanted me to feel or think. I would develop my own opinions. I would weigh evidence, and I would make my own decisions. She hated that. She hated me for it. And there were also certain things that she expected from her children that she didn't get from me. When the door closed and no one else was around, there were certain things that she would do with my brother that no mother has any. And my brother's way to survive that was by submissively cooperating. And when she tried that with me, I fought like a rabid dog. And at that point, starting probably with the first encounter, the war was on.
Man, listen, thank you so much for being so open and sharing all of that. It's hard enough for us sometimes to look in the mirror and recognize some of the discrepancies in our own, in ourselves that we don't want to acknowledge. The fact that you were brave enough to not only acknowledge these things about your life yourself, but also put it out there and share it with us, I think is so profound and is commendable. And then the second point that I wanted to bring up was, when we were on the pre-screening call, we were talking about the title of our show, People of Distinction. And I remember you made a comment about, how you didn't know how you made it to be on a show entitled People of Distinction. Jonah, listen, you must know this already. And if you don't, let me be the first to tell you, you are absolutely the truest embodiment of a person of distinction. Given your upbringing, given all of the obstacles and the adversity that you had to face in your life, and the fact that you were able to take all of that, of course, not get by it unscathed. I can only imagine, again, the feats that you had to go through to really put those at least somewhat to rest. But to continue to fight, continue to build yourself up to where you've went to school, you gathered an education, you received multiple degrees. Listen, man, again, it truly is an honor. You are absolutely a person of distinction. As you stated multiple times, the experiences that you have, no human being should ever have to go through it, let alone a child. And the fact that you are here and telling us about it shows us your strength, your bravery, and your intellect, that you were able to, again, man, build yourself up and push past it. That is absolutely incredible. Jonah, I can't help but go. I mean, I have a list of questions that I wanted to go into. None of that even seems right. The only way that I think the next thing that I feel we have to go into is some of your poetry, man. You've articulated your life. You've articulated really what has built you up to the person that you are today, to the man that you are today. And I'm assuming that this book, from knowing from hearing what we just heard from you, and also from knowing what we heard in the pre-screening call, or what I heard in the pre-screening call, rather, this book is a self-help narrative, right? You wanted to put this out to other individuals that are out there that find themselves in difficult situations, that find themselves in predicaments where they're not really sure how to communicate. They're not really sure how to connect with those around them. Again, the only thing that I can think of to go on to next would be one of your poems, please.
When I got out of the Army, and even before I went into the Army, I was a vicious, angry monster. And say what you will about a hospital run by politicians. The VA is not a perfect organization, but they turned me into a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I owe them my life. I remember going into an office. I won't say the organization's name, but they exist to assist returning veterans suffering from PTSD. And they offered PTSD counseling. And I had just moved into the Prescott area, and I went into one of these offices asking about one of these counselors, and they asked me, "Where did you deploy?" And I told them, while serving in the military, I did not deploy. My condition predates my service. My symptoms are virtually identical to combat stress. Gunshots don't set me off. But otherwise, it's quite similar. I'm just looking for some counseling. This is an ongoing effort. And the counter attendant said, "We don't do daddy issues here." Someone else chimed in and said, "Yeah, we don't give out hugs. Get out." So I wrote something that I think every soldier can understand. I think every cop can understand, and I think every EMT and every nurse can understand. And I think everyone who has been through something like what I have been through can also understand. And in my book, I precede every poem with a narrative that explains the poem. But in this case, I will read the poem to you first, and if you want, after that, I will read the narrative that goes with it.
Yes, please.
This one is called I Wore That Uniform Too. I can relate to your sleepless nights, paranoia, anger, and frights. I understand why you say what you say and do what you do, because I wore that uniform too. I recognize the look in your eyes. I hear the desperate pleas and cries. We aren't so different, me and you, because I wore that uniform too. Like you, I've seen the ugly side of life. I've dealt with similar frustrations and strife. I can relate, and you know it's true, because I wore that uniform too. I'm familiar with that 1,000-yard stare and the feeling of hopelessness and despair. Despite it all, we remain true blue, because I wore that uniform too.
Fantastic. Jonah, before I even offer any reflections, please go ahead with the narrative that you wrote to go along with that.
All right. The uniform is trauma. This is for folks who, like me, bear the physical or psychological scars of difficult circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
This can come from how someone is raised or other sources, such as occupational stress. Law enforcers, for example, have a most taxing job. This is especially so these days with anti-American and domestic terrorist groups promoting hatred and division while working against capitalism and our justice system. Understandably, these groups deeply resent equal opportunity and the fair and equal application of just law that peace officers deliver every day, often at risk to their own lives. This poem is for all who put themselves in harm's way in the interest of serving those in need, and recognizes that one need no uniform to know pain, sacrifice, and loss. In fact, pets can be traumatized too. All animals can be so affected. Trauma hurts everyone.
Wow. Jonah, thank you so much for sharing it. Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about, again, you're talking about a very specific group of people that have experienced specific trauma. But when we think about the concept and the understanding of trauma, we can all relate. We're all in this together, right? You may not be able to specifically understand the trauma that I went through. I may not be able to completely relate to the trauma that you went through, but at the end of the day, we understand what it feels like. We understand what that does to the human psyche and the importance of why. Exactly. And the importance of being together, right? Really leaning on each other that way. Jonah, that's fantastic, man. Listen, being that you are someone who has experienced their fair amount of trauma, not only yourself, but family around you growing up, but also someone that didn't allow that trauma to bury them, right? For lack of a better term, someone that was able to persevere past that. Jonah, any tips that you can offer our listening audience? Anybody that is maybe going through a tough time themselves and can't see the light at the end of the tunnel and doesn't really know what to do or how to get out of the situation that they find themselves in. Any words of wisdom that you can portray to our listening audience?
Yeah, make a decision and stick with it. Here's the thing. All my life, I've never been high. I've never had any alcohol. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I don't party. And if there's not a good group of people for me to walk among, I walk alone. Everyone can be part of a community, or if necessary, they can be an island. But every island is self-sufficient, and everyone can do that. We all have it within us to be that. I totally understand why somebody, after looking around and seeing the squalor around them would be tempted and even give in to the temptation of picking up a needle with a syringe of happiness. I get that, but that's not real happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And just as you wouldn't accept a compliment from somebody who you knew didn't mean it, you can't accept that into you. You can't depend on that. My parents broke my leg. They broke one of my hands. I had a skull fracture from being beaten. A pelvis fracture when I was run down by a truck when Gloria was trying to get me out of the way. She always threatened to leave me dead in the desert. She was going to leave me dead in the desert. She would leave me dead in the desert. Then one day it happened, and I was left in the desert. Couldn't walk. Pelvis was broken. I just been run down by a truck. I crawled back to the road on my elbows. Someone found me, took me to a hospital. And I was only 15 at the time, but I remember telling the doctor, don't tell my mother, she'll kill me if she finds out I survived. I knew then she was behind it, but I didn't know all the details until later. When I was able to walk again, I had to split an awful lot of firewood to pay for that ambulance bill. And she was furious. But I never took a vacation from it. I wasn't going to accept anything into me that would be intoxicating. If I was going to ever have happiness, it was going to be the real thing. If I would ever have pride, it would be the real thing. It wouldn't be from cocaine making me feel like I'm invincible. It wouldn't be from heroin making me feel like everything's okay. If everything is going to be okay, it's going to be because I made it that way. Not because it was given to me. Not because it was chemically induced. I wanted the real thing. My older brother, who I told you was terribly, terribly treated, when we were younger, when we were sleeping, Gloria would crush up Xanax and Percocet and Vicodin and all kinds of things, and she would put it in our mouths while we were sleeping. I learned to be a very light sleeper, and to this day I sleep with one arm over my mouth. Wow. My brother did not. When he woke up, he was a zombie, and he did everything she wanted. Nothing was off the table, and I wouldn't. So my brother got screwed up, if you ask me, more than me. But he was able to stay with me for a couple of years, and I forced him to clean up. And although the sound of my older brother crying like a baby when he was having nightmares and he was saying, "Mommy, don't do it again. No, I don't want to do this anymore," that tore me apart. I had to force him to go through that. I couldn't interrupt his sleep. I couldn't let him get high. I couldn't let him go back to drinking. Eventually, the stress got too much. He regressed. A lot of his behavior was too bizarre. I was looking at getting married. My wife was going to move in with me. That's what wives do. I couldn't have him there, and I had to show him the door. A year and a half later, I got a message through a mutual friend saying my brother was trying to get a hold of me. And guess what? He's now a pastor, and he works counseling troubled youth.
Wow.
I'm very, very proud of my... How about that, huh? Now, he credits me with forcing him to open his eyes, and he credits God with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But he's the one who's doing it. He's the one who's doing it. Now, to give you an idea where my brother was, and I can't get into too much detail for obvious reasons, one being time, but he was never high. Never. He spent more of his adult life in prison than he did free, and even when he was in prison, he was high every day. He did not remember most of his youth. A lot of the events that came back to him once he sobered up, it was the first time he thought of it. He had no recollection of that. This takes bravery.
Absolutely.
And I just think he's an absolutely phenomenal man. And one of the poems I wrote is about him. It's called My Brother Gets High. I couldn't be prouder of him. And for anybody who's listening, who's been through some serious turmoil. Every time you pick up a needle, every time you light a fire under a spoon, every time you slap your spouse around, every time you cut yourself, you're giving in to that power that overwhelmed you. You're not being stronger than that. Every time you do that, every tear you've ever cried, every memory you've ever tried to forget, it all indicates that you lost. You can take back that win by refusing to give in. All of my life, if I got high one time, that a-hole won. If I took one drink, thinking back to when I was 11 and she held my head back and she forced my mouth open trying to put beer in my mouth, and I fought her. If I take one beer now, she wins. And if I don't overcome my anger, I don't have to experience a full night of peaceful slumber, which I don't think I've ever had in my whole life. As it stands, I only sleep about 3 hours a night. Last night, I went to bed at about 11:30 p.m. and I woke up at 2. I started work at 3. I worked until 4 p.m. and then I came home for this interview. So I'm always going to be disturbed. This monster that grew inside me breathes fire and destroys. I got it in a cage. It's never going to die. But I got control of this monster. And whoever's listening, you can too. But not if you keep getting high. Not if you keep getting angry. And not if you hate yourself the way this evil force hated you when it was hurting you, when it was ignoring you, when it was neglecting you, when it was abusing you, when it was trying to kill you. Every time you give in, it wins, and you lose. Every time you refuse to give in, you win. Sometimes it's not how fast we can walk into the wind.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just holding your ground. Don't let the wind push you over. All you have to do is stand there. Hold your ground. Stand strong. And then you win. It's not necessarily what you do, but what you don't do. What you won't do, or what you won't do anymore. At that point, you win. Now, you have to maintain that, because you can win for 6 months, and then you can lose again. And then all this effort that you put into winning, all this effort that you put into succeeding, it was for nothing. Because you went and got high again, or you hurt someone again, or you hurt yourself again. So you got to start all over. And you got to maintain that. I was asked once if I'm a good man. And my answer was, if I were, doing what's right and not doing what's wrong, bad, wouldn't be so freaking hard. So I don't know that I am. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let that a-hole win.
There you have it. Jonah, listen, man, from everything from your poetry to the words of wisdom that you've been able to relay and impress on our listening audience, I said it at the beginning, I'm going to say it again. You truly are a person of distinction. Guys, you know what you got to do. You got to head on over to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you're not already there, pinch yourself. I don't know what you're doing. Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. Pick up your copy of Beyond Now by Jonah Fontenot. You surely will not be disappointed. Jonah, it has been an absolute honor. Thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Thank you for having me.